Welcome back to Vancouver Carpenter. So today we're going to help you figure out why your tape is pulling the paint off your walls or your trim or whatever it is that it's pulling the paint off. The first problem that we have going on right here is actually too much paint buildup over top of the tape. So the tape was applied here and it may or may not have been pressed down really firmly. So we might be getting a little bit of bleed under the tape. But the main problem we have right here is that there's just a lot of paint right here. So as soon as we try and lift it up, there's so much paint connected to both here and this surface of the wall that as soon as we start pulling, we can see it just wants to lift it up. So right now I'm trying to pull down to minimize that. And we can see it's not doing it as much. If we pull up, it gets worse. So there's a little bit of that going on, like pull down when you're pulling your tape away. But I'm also wondering if I can use my knife really quickly, not to cut into the baseboard or the wall, but to just score the paint a tiny bit. So I'm very gently right now scoring this paint right in that corner, not using much force at all. Okay, that did help. Now what we can definitely see though is we're getting a lot of bleed underneath. So one of the things that's going on here is we've got a combination of the paint bleeding underneath and being over top, and it's kind of like pinching the tape. So when we go to lift the tape, it's got like this little crab pinch going on and it pulls the paint with it. So cutting it helped a little bit here. Now we still got a little bit of work to do cleaning that before we paint the baseboards, but that'll be solved in a little while. Okay, now I want to look at the couple of reasons why this is happening. So one is the mechanical reason, like we just talked about. The paint is actually getting around the tape and being able to be pulled right off. So this one right here, where we have a lot going on, I'm pretty sure what happened there is that a freshly painted wall was taped off. So when you're in a rush and you're trying to get a bunch of different colors done in a day, and you think it's dry because you can put your hand on it, but then you tape onto it, it's definitely going to pull the paint off. So you have to be really careful about that kind of stuff. I almost never ever put tape over top of fresh paint. So one of the few times that I do like to use tape is I like to paint my trim and then I'll tape the trim off and get a nice clean line of wall paint onto it, while also being careful not to leave much paint on the actual tape. So I really make sure to actually brush most of the paint off the tape so that when you lift that tape off, there's not much of a mechanical connection there, and it just pulls off and leans okay, I'm gonna have to leave this in because I've said leans twice. It pulls off and leaves a clean line, especially if you use a tape like this. So either frog tape or one of these sharp line ones, the multi-surface. I think this is just a blue Scotch. But yeah, you can use those higher end tapes, and while they're more expensive, they're gonna leave you with a nicer finished job. They have some sort of technology where the paint goes and touches the edge of the tape and it just kind of stops it from wicking under. So that'll help you a lot. So I can see that when the tape was being installed, not enough force was being applied. Baseboards and trim, you should be able to leave a really sharp line because it's an actual like solid connection between the trim and the wall. There's usually quite an obvious, easy to find 90-degree. So if you really use your fingernail and get that edge down, no paint should be able to get through there. So on this one, it's pretty clear that it just wasn't pressed down hard enough. Okay, now let's talk about a couple more reasons why this could be. Like we said, it's probably just that it got taped while the paint was too fresh. But there's another reason, like sometimes I will actually resort to taping a wall, and the places where it fails is if I had to do a little bit of patches in the corner or something, the fresh drywall mud that's been painted and had days to cure and has had good primer, all of these things, but the mud is usually where that will pull off for me. So that's something to consider. If you're doing a lot of patching on the wall and then you're taping onto that fresh paint, even if it's a few days later, it's really common for it to pull off of the drywall mud. So the reason that paint tends to pull off of fresh drywall mud is because fresh drywall mud is like, you have to think about it. What it is it's just like a bunch of dust being glued together with a binder. And it's intended to be sanded. So when you sand drywall mud, a bunch of dust flakes off. And so even if you've brushed the dust off the surface, even if you've primed it with a really good primer, what often happens is that product is just kind of meant to slough off. So when you put paint on it and then you put tape on it, it just has a tendency to pull that first really small layer of dust. Even if you wipe the dust off, the fact is you're dealing with a product that is dust and glue, if that makes sense to you guys. So now let's really quickly talk about why we're getting so much failure in between these two paints. So, I mean, a lot of people think paint is paint is paint, but there is a difference in quality between paint brands. So this one, I believe, is like a Rona brand, top of the line Rona brand, and this one is a bottom of the line Cloverdale brand. Rona is a big box store. Cloverdale is an actual paint store. So while this is a cheap paint and there were some other problems, apparently they were getting some flecks in the paint, so it just wasn't like a high quality paint. It looked like paint chips or something. But the adhesion, at least, over top of the Cloverdale primer that was used is actually working out. But it appears that the Rona paint is just not adhering well to the Cloverdale primer. And the Cloverdale primer, it felt good. Like, it was on the wall and I put my hand across it and it had like a good tacky feel. Like the kind of feel like if your kids walked across it once, you'd see nothing but handprints. So it's soaking everything up, which is what a good primer should do. It should be a little bit matte so that your next layer of paint sticks to it. But for whatever reason, these two paints weren't working too well together. So it doesn't hurt to kind of stick with the manufacturer you're using. If you're getting primer specifically from Sherwin-Williams, Benjamin Moore, wherever, one of these places, it doesn't hurt to continue along with one of their other product lines, their other wall paints. You might not be getting as much problems. But personally, I just think it's because it's paint from a big box store. Like, I don't ever buy paint from Rona or Home Depot. I only go to actual paint places for paint. Just to illustrate my example, so again, we can take a look and, I believe tape was used all along the ceiling to try and block the paint from going onto the ceiling. And we can see that all the paint is at least stuck, There may have been spots where it wasn't pressed up enough and it bled through, but generally it's actually a pretty clean line. And the paint didn't pull off the wall. So as we can see down here, we have that same problem going on along the ceiling as well. So it's a combination of that little crab grip thing I was talking about on the paint and the fact that these two paints don't seem to be behaving well together. Like in a classroom, the teacher would say, I'm gonna have to separate you two, and yeah, they're getting separated. Bad joke. Now there is some more nuances here. Another part of the problem is that we have a textured ceiling. So this is an orange peel texture, which is like, it's just flat enough to be able to tape to, and it's just textured enough to cause you grief. So the reason a textured ceiling is going to cause you grief is, you remember I mentioned a little while back that like where you have a piece of trim meeting a piece of wall, you have a really nice 90-degree kind of like mechanical hard edge. Easy to find, easy to tape to. But when you're talking about a ceiling angle, a lot of the time, it's been kind of rounded out a little bit by tape and sanding sponges and years of paint. So that's going to make it a little harder to find that exact edge. And the other thing is the fact that it's a little bit bumpy, it's going to make it harder to press down the tape 100% firmly. There's just naturally going to be little spaces where the paint is going to get in, get that little crab grip, and start pulling the paint off. Like we can see right here, it's doing it real good. So I think we're gonna try the knife thing one more time. And I have to reiterate how carefully you have to do this. Like if you are doing this firmly, you're gonna be cutting into the wall. Now the other thing here is, I don't know exactly where the tape ends and the paint begins. So I'm worried that in some spots I'm actually going to be leaving some of the tape behind. But that's doing a much better job. So if you are having a lot of problems with your paint peeling like this, really quickly try the knife. It works really well. Okay, now I know we need to get to some more solutions, because while we have actually started to solve some of these problems, I know that all the professional painters or the tradespeople that know the regular sequence of events have been screaming about how this normally gets done. So generally, the best advice is to take your time and learn how to cut in. So if you learn how to cut in, you're never going to have this problem along the ceiling. Now the downside is if you're a homeowner and you don't paint all the time, maybe you're doing like one room, it's the first time you've done it in years, it can take you a good few rooms, if you ever do, to learn how to cut in nicely. And especially if you're doing contrasting colors, like you're doing a darker color on a white ceiling, that's really hard. So I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for anybody who needs to use tape, right? Like sometimes you just have to. And I even stated myself, I actually like to use tape on trim because I get a better line faster than I do if I cut in the trim. Although it's possible, and that is what most pro painters do. They have a top-down philosophy. So they start on the ceiling, right? You paint the whole ceiling and you overlap onto the wall. Then you cut in really nicely on the wall without using any tape. And then they go down to the baseboards and they cut in the baseboards really nicely. And that takes, the baseboards and casing are the hardest. That takes the most practice. I definitely encourage anybody to take the time to learn how to cut in. There's tons of videos on YouTube. I'll make another video about cutting in one of these days. Hopefully I'll follow it up pretty quickly from this video. So whether you're a pro who never uses tape and just stop by to leave a bunch of nasty comments, or whether you're a homeowner who has to use tape all the time, I hope this video helped you figure out what you need to do. And don't listen to those mean people shaming you in the comments. We all need to do whatever we need to do to get the job done. And like I said, I like to put tape on the trim because for me, as somebody who paints semi-regularly, it's the fastest, cleanest way for me to do it. So again, I hope this solves some of the problems that you're having. And also, if you know some other reasons why this could be happening, leave a comment, a helpful one, hopefully. And I just want to say thanks for watching Vancouver Carpenter. I hope your project's going really well, and I hope it's turning out better than you expected. So thanks for watching. Till the next video.